So this is the theme. When life gets hard, stick together, be like Jesus, consider yourself lower than others, and don't grumble. Okay, so let's read the passage. Philippians 2:25 through 30. But I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not on him, but also on me, not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I am all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad and I may have less anxiety. So then welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give. And so what stands out to me is Paul's close relationship with Epaphroditus and the Philippians, and how Epaphroditus almost died for the work of Christ. And it got me thinking, he was early in my faith, a long time ago, but the second time I accepted Jesus into my heart. And I was just really like, okay, what does it mean to be a Christian? One of the biggest themes was Christ died for you, so you need to die for the Lord. Like, you need to sacrifice your belongings, your time, your resources, and give whatever you can. Even if you have to give your life, you have to give that to the Lord. And I think with that teaching, along with my codependency, I'm going to take responsibility for everybody, that it really tainted the way that I live my life. That it was honorable and pleasing to God if I sacrificed my what I need, my responsibilities, and my health for the sake of others. And looking back, I realized that this teaching was really a little bit unhealthy and unloving towards others and towards myself. And what I failed to understand was that always being the helper, like I'm going to be Jesus and I'm going to sacrifice, that it gave me a sense of power and control, that it made me feel needed. And in that kind of satisfaction that I was getting, it protected me from being vulnerable with others. And you all know I still struggle with this and sharing my needs and weaknesses, but this kind of dynamic, it really creates an imbalance in relationships where there's an exercise of power over one another, and it really prevents true loving and kind relationships and connections. And I don't think sacrificing this way, when we disregard our needs and our responsibilities and our well-being, I don't think that's the kind of love and sacrifice that Paul was writing about. And so today's question is, what does being like Jesus mean? And how do we consider ourselves lower than others as he did? And as you know, we always talk about it's not easy. It's not going to be an easy answer. It's going to be complex. It's not a formula. It's not like do A, B, and C and you'll get D. No, I don't know. I don't know what it's like. But it's hard, right? And it's complex. And so I thought the best person to answer it would be Pastor Stan. So Pastor Stan, can you help share Paul's different relational descriptions that he shared? And I think that will help us answer these questions.
Okay. I appreciate what Lori was saying, because I see living the Christian life as standing on 2 feet, but oftentimes we try to stand just on 1 foot. And you can stand on 1 foot for a while, but after a while you kind of feel out of balance. And eventually, you are going to need some help. And unfortunately, what happens is sometimes we stand so long on 1 foot that it isn't until we fall down that we look for the help. And so my encouragement today with this is learn to stand on 2 feet. And to stand on 2 feet is not to stand alone. It's to stand with others. And that's kind of what we're going to look at with the way that Paul describes his relationships. And the first way he described his relationship with Epaphroditus was he called him my brother. And if you think about that, it's saying that we're connected. We're in the same family. That the first thing he thinks about Epaphroditus is he's my brother. So it's this emotional and really a kindred kind of connection. And it's going to be expanded on that with the second thing was fellow worker. And the idea of what Lori was talking about, service, right? We think of work. And work can become very task-oriented, but it can become task-oriented individually. Like, I have to do what I need to do to be a good worker, right? But Paul uses the term fellow worker. So actually, Paul's image of work was doing it with other people and not just doing his own thing and then counting on other people to do theirs, but to do it together, to be in collaboration. And fellow, he's going to use that twice in fellow worker and fellow soldier. And so if you think about it, the use of fellow is an equal status. And so it's kind of going back to the first description of my brother, that we don't see somebody greater than us or better than us, but at the same time, we don't look at someone else less than us. And so we have this identity of being together in whatever we're doing. And if you think about it, a soldier back then, and maybe even now, a soldier's task was meant to be in fighting with other soldiers. Like, there was no soldier that their job was just to go out there and kill the enemy by themselves, all right, or fight by themselves. That's a more modern day concept that comic books have kind of helped us get an image of this Avenger kind of person. But that's not what a soldier is supposed to be about. A soldier is actually someone who's very submitted to authority and follows what is prescribed for the whole. And that's the way a soldier is most effective. And so when Paul's talking about fellow soldier and fellow worker, it's not like Paul is saying, he does what I say, but we're together in whatever we're doing. And so part of the relationship that Paul had with Epaphroditus it wasn't a top-down relationship. It was very much a level ground relationship where they walked together and they did things together. And the last thing was that he was able to minister to Paul's need. And that kind of goes into the second part of Paul sometimes, at least in my mind, has had this image of being very self-reliant, like he didn't need anybody. He just let people help him whenever he felt like it. But actually, if you read this description of the relationship that Paul had with Epaphroditus, he very much was a person who understood that he needed people. And in fact, if you look at in 2 Corinthians, which is basically a book about Paul's heart, what he says he will boast of, the thing that he's most treasured in his experience is when he was let down in Damascus by a basket by disciples. So it was in a place of great need, seemingly. It wasn't in a place where he felt all secure in things, but he was dependent on other people. So one of the things that I would encourage you to look at is, where are your ideas of what it means to be a mature person coming from? That is part of that question. What does it mean to be like Jesus? Because Jesus never commanded people to bow at his feet. In fact, he washed people's feet. Jesus never told someone that he was greater than them. He pointed to the Father and said, the Father is greater than me. And his whole life was designed as an invitation for other people to come alongside and get to know him. And that's what he was about. So this idea of creating yourself into this strong individual and things, that's not biblical. In fact, the people who think they're strong individually wind up finding out just how little they are in things. But the other thing I wanted to talk about in connection with Paul's relationship with Epaphroditus was in this letter, this passage, he talks about an emotional connection. That the emotional connection Epaphroditus and Paul shared was they were able to sorrow together, and there was a mutual sacrifice. They sacrificed for each other. Those two emotional connections are not normally the way we think a good relationship is about, right? Because when we think about a good relationship, we think of happy times, to be able to share these wonderful times together. But Paul, in his relationship with Epaphroditus, saw that it was in the sorrow and in the sacrifice that his relationship was actually good, and just the beauty of that relationship. So it's kind of this thing of, if you think about it, a friend only proves to be a friend when you're going through hard times. Because hard times are when it's going to be about not the circumstances. The circumstances are all going to be bad. But if there's a friendship there, that person will stay despite the circumstances. And not only stay, but be with you in those circumstances. That's what Epaphroditus was. He didn't just, as Picasso mentioned, give the food and say, okay, hope you had a good meal, see ya. He stuck with Paul. I believe maybe there was times when Epaphroditus just spent the time over that hole that Paul, and looking down and just speaking and telling Paul, I'm here. You may not be able to see me, but I'm here. Epaphroditus to me was just a present influence on Paul. He didn't change any of Paul's circumstances because he didn't get him out of jail. He didn't figure out a way to break him out and get him into a better place. He just stayed with Paul. And he stayed to the extent it talks about that he even became sick himself, which is probably because he gave whatever food he had and didn't take enough for himself. And so I think it was Paul who told Epaphroditus, you have to be taking care of yourself also. And so there was this mutual helping each other. So it wasn't just a one-way kind of thing. It was a mutual relationship of helping each other and really being involved with each other. And sometimes we don't get that image of Paul, right? And sometimes it's like what Lori describes it. Well, to be a really good Christian, you got to be able to just sacrifice yourself and not have to take help from anybody else. And, you just have to be strong yourself. And I believe that's a false image of what God is really asking us to be. I believe it's a false image of Jesus. If anyone in this world could have just lived without people's help, it was Jesus. But he didn't live that way. He lived a life that in a lot of ways he was totally dependent on people providing for him. If he wanted to be self-sufficient, he would retire a carpenter and use the funds to go out in ministry, but he didn't. If he wanted to be able to have a happy time, he would not have chosen the 12 men that he did. Because most of the time, they were fighting with each other. And so that, to me, says that there's something about being able to embrace hardship, embrace things that are bad, and have people there, like Epaphroditus, to be able to spend time with you or be present with you. And everybody needs somebody like that. And Jesus is no exception to that. So, why don't we just maybe pause a moment, and then Lori can give some of her thoughts on this. But if there's a person here that feels like they have no Epaphroditus, and they don't know where that's going to come from, I'd just like to take a moment and just pray for you. Because God says that he will meet every need that you have. And that is definitely a need, because we're all human here. I don't see anybody who's not human. And so, would you let me pray? Father, thank you that you look at us and say, what a wonderful creation I made when I brought, and you can fill in your name, into this world. But I never put this person into the world to live by themselves. I never put this person in the world to become so self-reliant that they got to the point where they felt like they never needed anyone, or that even that they would be in a place where they would not experience hurt, they would not experience sorrow. But you did create us, you create each person here to be able to know that no matter where they are never alone. And that you are present, but more than that, that you have people that you want them to be able to share that with and be with and know you as the one who not only sees them, but hears them and the cry of their heart in the place where they're right now just struggling to even ask that you are there. So thank you, Lord, for being a God who says, as long as we have breath, we have an opportunity to encounter something greater. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. I think that's so important. And I appreciate your prayer, because we all need an Epaphroditus in our lives. At least one, 2 or 3 would be really great. Can you share a little bit more about Epaphroditus and the Philippians connection? Because he was a believer in the church.
Right. And, the word messenger in the English translation, it's actually Apollos, which is translated apostle. So Epaphroditus was probably a leader in the church. And so the church sent its leader to minister to Paul, which says a lot about the church's love for Paul and how much they wanted. But it also says a lot about Epaphroditus, in that he really loved his church, his community, right? And so that's why he was so distressed. It says that when Paul told them, they heard he was sick, and he knew that they would just be wanting so much to be with him, to minister to him and things. And so what it says to me is that there was a shared concern among all of the community for each other. And, in order to be an Epaphroditus, you have to have a community that you feel empowered and that embraces you and lets you become the person that God made you to be. And so, to me, one of the things that was very evident in Epaphroditus' ministry and that Paul wanted to kind of highlight a little bit was, it wasn't just Epaphroditus was skilled and had these marvelous gifts. It was that he was part of a community. And so his needs, he knew, were going to be met. And he didn't neglect. He kind of forgot, I think, and that's why Paul had to remind him. And Paul was grateful that God didn't take him away, because he knew that would be really traumatic for everybody. But it was just a matter of being able to know that no matter what you do, you're not alone, and you have people supporting you. And that's, in essence, how God has designed all of us to be. We all need to feel like we belong someplace. And, ideally, I guess, or what we think society has kind of lost maybe a little bit, is the idea of family, where we are all together, and no matter what happens, we're going to stick together and be family together. And that is, unfortunately, a lack in my opinion, a lack in the church, is that we tend to emphasize service or achievement more than that we care for one another and that we care about each other, and that you don't have to be doing a thing, that you still belong here. And that is what I believe part of the Philippians community had. And I think that's what Paul was saying when he says that their love might grow more and more. Because it's an ongoing thing. It's like being healthy physically, right? One day you can be without illness, but the next day you can have an illness. Now, does that mean that you're unhealthy? No, I just think that you got an illness, and that your body that is healthy is going to be able to fight that illness off. To put it in a spiritual context, you run into trials, you run into places where you don't know what's going to happen, and you need help. The resource that God has given is the community, the church, and we can help each other. Maybe not be able to solve the disease or cure the disease, but let you know that you aren't alone in the disease and that you are not ostracized from the community because of that disease. So I think that's something that we need to really hold as a value here at Westlight, is that we are all in this together, that nobody is not part of this. And so we need to care for one another.
That's good. So it's like, it's okay to not be okay.
Yes.
Even though we want to be self-sufficient and strong. It's okay to not be okay. That's a good thing. I love that, and how he's not just, Epaphroditus was just the FedEx guy delivering the package, but and not that I'm the only one who could fix the problem, I have the money, I'm going to go do it. But he wanted to do it. He wanted to share in that experience. And it was those connections that empowered him and equipped him to go. Okay, so if we want to answer the question, because I'm all about fixing and answering, what does being like Jesus mean, and how do we consider ourselves lower than others, as he did, is, as you were saying, just giving and receiving, having it being mutual. No one is having the power to make someone do something that they want them to do, but it's the sharing and the receiving of experiences and life and everything.
Well, one of the things is that Paul didn't see service to him as a task. He saw it more as a person who was willing to be present with them. And so in approaching someone who has a need, if you can, just affirm that you want to be with that person before you try to figure out a solution. I'm guilty of this because I hear someone's in need, so I want to have a solution before I come see them or interact with them. But what's really needed is that they know they aren't alone. Because the first thing I believe that the enemy does when trials happen is that he tries to separate relationships that we have. I take that from the book of Job, right? That in all those things that Satan thought held Job's relationship with God, that somehow if all those things were gone, Job's relationship with God would disappear too. But it didn't. Because Job knew that God cares for me. I don't understand why this is happening to me, but he cares for me. And that's why he kept complaining. He kept saying to God, why am I doing this? And then Job's friends, I think, under Satan's influence again, were trying to fix Job and really driving a wedge between them and Job. And that's why at the end of that book, one of the first things that God tells his friends to do is go back to Job and say you're sorry. Have him pray for you. Restoration of relationship. So the first thing is a question. So are you willing to be present? Even though you may not have answers to this person's situation, just asking them, how are you doing in this situation? Second thing is in trauma, I believe it's like a prison, that you're in a hole, right? And you don't know where your nourishment's going to come from, and you're kind of dependent on other people. But I would encourage you to recognize you do have physical needs, but you also have spiritual needs, and to be aware of both, because they go hand in hand. It's the 2 feet example. If you just try to stand on one foot, whether it be spiritual or physical, you can stand for a while, but you're going to feel out of balance. And then the last thing is, I would really encourage us to define what we think is a mature relationship. Because I think sometimes we think that doing or being like Jesus is that Jesus was so self-sufficient that whatever bad things happened, that he knew how to handle it. And I would disagree with that. I think he went, in the garden, he went to the Father and said, isn't there some way that this can not happen? And so being very real with what's going on inside of you is where I believe you can mature. Because like I said, you don't grow in a relationship with a person when all you're doing is having a good time with the person. It's when things are bad and rough that you really see how strong your relationship is. And in a positive sense, you develop a greater intimacy with each other. Because like Lori said, to be vulnerable is to be able to feel safe enough to share wherever you are, and to know that this person will not think less of you because you're not okay. And you might want to start, just a kind of side note, because this is where I need to start a lot of times, is to look at the way you talk to yourself. To look at, when you look at your life and say, man, you just don't do the right thing Every single time. Now, every time you use every single, that's a bad thing, okay? I'll tell you that now, okay? That's a bad thing to say to somebody, and it's a bad thing to say to yourself. Because that's not true. It's not true. But in any event, the first thing I believe is to be able to see that we can't fix ourselves, but that's not what God is asking us to do. We can't make ourselves strong, but that's not what God is asking us to do. That the ladder that God is asking us to travel on is a ladder that leads downward and not upward. And so it's a matter of humility is confidence properly placed. And so if we have placed our confidence in what we see or who we think we are, we've got it placed in the wrong place. The place of confidence is in the hands of Jesus and letting him say, you belong to me. And nobody will ever change that. So, maybe some questions that kind of follow up on those things is, I would invite you to really be aware of what you're feeling. Because especially in this season, the expectation is all around. This is the holiday season, to use Christian terms. We're celebrating the first coming of Jesus. So you got to be happy, right? You got to be joyful. And I would say that if you look at I think Cost did a sermon on this before. You look at the story of Jesus' coming, there's a lot of sorrow there. There's a lot of hard stuff that went down. And even when Jesus was born, I think part of it, yes, Mary marveled, and I think Joseph did too. But I think Joseph maybe Mary was thinking, now what are we going to do? We got no job. We're in a foreign place. We got a little baby now. What are we going to do? And I think that's where realizing that there were other people, that's why I think God brought the shepherds there, just to be able to surround them. Because the shepherds didn't give them any money or anything, as far as we know. But they supported them. They helped them. Then the next thing is, kind of in conjunction with that, is what do you need? What do you really need? And to be honest with that. And the first place to go with that is to go with God, to ask God, but allow him to give you a response. And maybe he'll bring up a person that, maybe I'll talk to this person about this. Not to solve your problem, but just to be able to share in it. And to be able to share in your sorrow, in your fear, whatever it is. And then the last question is, maybe in you're going through this, nothing comes up, but maybe asking God, so it looks like I've got a good community, looks like I've got a good place, so who can I be the Epaphroditus? Who are you sending me to be the helper and to share? And the amazing thing is that in God's economy, the more you give away, the more you actually have. And there's something, not materially, but relationally and in ways, in things that no person can ever take away. That Matthew passage about treasures in heaven, that is what you will have. And you get to enjoy some of that treasure here. So, that's kind of the challenge. But like Lori said, it's okay not to be able to feel like you can do this. In fact, I think that's the most real thing you could say. Because nobody can do it by themselves. We need each other, and we want to be there for each other. So, we'll close in prayer. All right.